Welcome to the First Right Podcast, a weekly conservative news show brought to you by Restoration of America. I'm Jerry Ewalt, Chief Marketing Officer for Restoration of America. And today we are blessed to have a first-time guest, Dr. Robert Epstein, a renowned psychologist, author, editor, researcher, and professor. He is a distinguished scientist who is passionate about educating the public on advances in mental health and the behavioral sciences. All right, well, Dr. Epstein, thank you so much for joining the show today.
My pleasure. Very nice to be here.
Yeah, well, I can't wait to get into the questions here, but before we do, you have quite a distinguished background and career. Can you give us just a quick snapshot of that?
Sure. My PhD is from Harvard University. I was B.F. Skinner's last doctoral student, so in my field, that impresses people who know about the history of psychology. I have been a professor, a researcher for most of my career, but I also have a stint in the world of media. I hosted several national radio shows, and I was editor-in-chief of Psychology Today magazine. But mainly I'm a researcher. So I've been digging in on research for more than 40 years, and about 11 years ago now, I got very interested in big tech, and I started a research program, which is still unique in the world, to see what kind of power these tech companies have to manipulate opinions and purchases and votes to indoctrinate children. And I've been digging in on that since 2013, and then starting in 2016, I started to develop methods for monitoring the tech companies to see whether they're actually using these new techniques that my team and I have discovered and studied and quantified now for a long time.
Yeah, I think, again, and I start off with your distinguished career because you've done so much during your career, but you're becoming more and more known for the guy that's uncovering the big tech problem that we have. And I say problem because most people, when they think of big tech, they think of censorship. Like if there's a problem with a big tech, it's all about censorship. You're taking it in a little different direction. Yes, censorship bad, but what you have uncovered, I should say, is related towards the way the algorithms are manipulating the way that you're thinking. So this goes back to the psychology piece of what you do. So explain more about what you've uncovered, what big tech is doing from a psychological perspective to the users of Google, if you will, or any of these big tech platforms.
Well, first of all, there are three big threats. Yeah. Surveillance, which is so extensive now that if people had any idea what was going on, they wouldn't touch a cell phone or a computer. They wouldn't even touch it. So, Google alone is monitoring us and our kids over more than 200 different platforms, most of which people haven't even heard of. Yeah. Censorship is the second big threat, and I do study that indirectly because that's one of the ways you manipulate people. Because the problem with censorship is you don't know what they don't show. And they have complete control over what more than 4 billion people see and don't see. Yeah. And this is something people don't understand at all. People don't get this, that they have control over what information goes viral and what doesn't. So when these tech companies, I published an article about this recently in the Epoch Times, when these tech companies want to drive attention to something like rigged voting machines or ballot stuffing, okay, if you see those stories spreading like wildfire, it's because the tech companies want you to see them. And they're doing that mainly for misdirection. They want you looking over there. They don't want you looking at them. So censorship is part of the manipulation problem. But yes, it's true that my team and I have focused now for more than 11 years on looking at new forms of manipulation that the internet has made possible. And they are terrifying. We've discovered now about a dozen of them. The first one that we learned about is called SEME, the Search Engine Manipulation Effect, which we published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences back in 2015. I did testify before Congress about a bunch of these techniques. These are frightening because in a national election, In 2020, for example, uh, we calculated that Google alone probably shifted 6 million votes to Joe Biden without anyone knowing, and with no paper trail except the monitoring that we had done. We had done quite extensive monitoring in 2020. But generally, when they're manipulating us, they're doing it in a way that people cannot see, and that's extremely dangerous.
I use Google. I've used search engines before. I'm able. They can't manipulate me. How are these people manipulating someone like myself? From a psychological perspective, how does this happen?
Sure, that's a very good question. First of all, I hate to disappoint you, but they can manipulate you. They manipulate you all the time. They manipulate you on issues where you're undecided. So they can't if you're a devoted, let's say, conservative
Mm-hmm.
Republican, they can't manipulate you on politics. But there's always something, where you're going to go on vacation, which restaurant you're going to eat in, and so on. Even, which pediatrician you're going to use. There's always something that people are undecided about. And that's where they have their power. They know exactly who's undecided about
Mm,
everything, every moment in time, because if you've been using the internet for 20 years, Google has more than 3 million pages of information about you. They know more about
yeah.
you than you do, and they use that information to manipulate. The more information you have about people,
Mm,
as the Stasi in Germany knew, as J. Edgar Hoover knew, the more information you have about people, the easier it is to nudge them, push them
right.
subtly or not so subtly into one direction or the other. And that's what they're doing. Now I can tell you in detail for hours and hours
Yeah.
specifically about what these techniques are that they're using, because that's what we study and we name them and we quantify them, and it's terrifying.
So that you started off by saying one of the big issues are surveillance. A lot of people say, "Hey, look, I have nothing to hide. I don't
Right.
care if people." I'm sure you hear this all the time. I have nothing to hide. Don't worry. It's not a big deal, but it is a big deal from what you're saying because when the more they know about you, years and pages and pages of data, they can then feed it through. Let's call it the black box with all these algorithms that they can sort through, and then at that point, they know you better than you know yourself.
Not just that, but they use digital models now of you. I mean, each model is unique to the individual. So they build digital models of each of us and use those models to make specific predictions about what we're going to do. And so they know everything about our wants, our needs, and literally the next move we're going to make, and the next uh, turn that we're going to make in our car. I mean, you name it. And again, as you said, the more you know about people, the easier it is
Yeah.
to manipulate them. So uh, let me just focus on one issue briefly here.
Mm-hmm.
In elections, if you go back 6 months before an election, so imagine early next year, it's a big election year, very important election year for everybody, and go back 6 months before November, whatever that month happens to be. At that point in time, according to surveys, somewhere between 20 and 60% of the electorate is undecided.
Right.
So bare minimum is 20, but it could be even 60% that are still undecided. As you get closer to the election, of course, more people make up their minds. Here's the problem. A company like Google, they know exactly who those people are, and they're sending personalized content
Mm-hmm.
to everybody. So they're sending content to push people who are undecided over in one direction. And that is why in a national election, they can easily shift upwards of 15 million votes. Well, just think about it. You've got 150 million voters, even if only 20% of them were undecided. So that's 30 million people. Uh, they can shift among undecided people, according to the research we've been doing, between 20 and 80% of those undecided people, with no one knowing what they're doing. And
20 to 80.
normally, yeah, 20 to 80, because we do randomized controlled experiments here almost every day, and we can show technique by technique by technique exactly what the power is to shift the thinking, the voting preferences, the purchases of people who are undecided. and it's somewhere between 20 and 80%. So take 30 million, which is very, very conservative. That's rock bottom, undecided people 6 months before an election. Take 20% of that. Well, 20% of 6 million, that's already 6 million people at least. Take 80% of 30
Yeah.
million. Now you've got 24 million. See the problem here? They
Absolutely.
can't manipulate you, Jerry, on certain issues. Absolutely not.
Right.
But they can manipulate people who are undecided very, very easily.
Yeah, and I said that with tongue in cheek, right? Because what I'm getting at is we're moving from this is just capitalism, and we're trying, instead of going out to the store and buying something that Google might be recommending, you're talking about election tampering is what this is. Because if the algorithms are pushing undecided people, which a lot of people are, in one direction over another, that's unconstitutional.
Well, it's also illegal because it's a violation of campaign finance laws. And I work with AGs around the country. I work with members of Congress who are just waiting. They're just waiting until we have enough data to test that idea in court and to begin to send some of these corporate executives to jail, because people do go to jail when they make large campaign contributions and don't declare them. And
Right.
it's true, if Google, let's say on its homepage, and this is real, by the way, we know this because we have data, massive amounts of data now.
Right.
If Google on election day, for example, sends out go vote reminders just to members of one party, or mainly to members of one party, on their homepage, where it's normally there's nothing, but on election day, sometimes you see go vote, very
Yep.
colorful. I'm sure you've seen that.
Of course.
But if they're sending that mainly to members of one party, do you know how many votes that can shift on that
Hmm.
one day? And we know this from not just from our research, but we know it from Facebook's own published research.
Hmm.
In a nationwide election, that can shift 450,000 votes. It can give 450,000 more votes to one party than to the other. So now I'll tell you some real data from the 2022 midterms. This is data we collected in the state of Florida. 100% of liberals were getting go vote reminders all day on election day. In Florida, 59% of
Yeah.
conservatives were getting go vote reminders.
I wonder
Now
why.
that's
Yeah.
now think of how blatant that is. Except the problem is, unless you're doing monitoring, and we're the only team in the world that does this, unless you're monitoring, you don't know that that's occurring, right? You don't know that
Right.
you're not getting a reminder and someone else is getting a reminder. You don't know that. But now, here's the thing. Google would say, well, we're not breaking any laws because that's free for us to do. It doesn't cost us anything. And we're just exercising our First Amendment right to free speech. But see, that's not the issue. The issue is, what would it cost you? What would it cost me to use the Google homepage, which is seen 500 million times a day in the United States? What would it cost us to send a targeted message to people on election day? $100 million? In other words, they are making massive in-kind donations to candidates and to parties without declaring them.
Mm-hmm.
But you need
Mm-hmm.
the data. You can't use an anecdote here. You need the data. And that's why we have learned now how to preserve, in not just in elections, but every single day. We've learned how to preserve millions of what Google calls ephemeral experiences. And that's the key to this whole thing. That's how they manipulate, using ephemeral experiences. And happy to explain what that is if you're not familiar with it.
Well, I mean, please do. I think the audience would like to know. So, and I think as you're doing that, the question then is, you've got the data, and it's highly illegal. So why? How come we're not stopping them? Why does it continue?
Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. In the United States, we're in a tough spot. These companies are an important part of our economy. They donate massive amounts of money to almost every single university, to almost every researcher who does anything on tech. they also are major donors to political campaigns. So they've in this country, we've got a problem here. They've got so many people in their pockets that it's hard for people to counter them. In the EU, on the other hand, Google has been fined 4 times in the last few years, more than 10 billion euros for example, posting biased search results. In other words, for interfering in people's lives in
Mm-hmm.
ways that are illegal. So in the EU, they're not afraid of Google. Here, unfortunately, a lot of our officials are afraid.
Mm.
And, I did have a wonderful 4-hour private dinner with Ted Cruz at one point, and he really understands these issues. And I said, "Why aren't you guys acting?" He
Yeah.
said, "Well, you got to have a bipartisan support for something like this." He said, "And the Democrats all benefit by these companies, which, we're 96% of donations from Google go to Democrats." So he says the Democrats won't touch them. He said, and Republicans generally don't like regulation.
Yeah.
So, you know, but having said that, we are collecting so much data on a massive scale now, and our monitoring system's getting bigger and bigger every day, that I am in touch with certain attorneys general and certain members of Congress who will pull the trigger. They will when the time comes. It might be later this year. It'll certainly be sometime next year, and they will use the data we are collecting to take down some of these companies. Because what they are doing is wrong, it's immoral, it's unethical, it undermines democracy
Mm-hmm.
completely, because they determine in any close election, not just here but around the world, they determine who wins. In other words, they're shaping our government, and they are taking away from us the free and fair election without anyone really knowing
Yes.
that they're doing that. And I find that unacceptable, and I also find it terrifying. But there's no question. There's not. It's not like this is. You know. I mean, for example, on YouTube, 2022 elections, the up next suggestion that's coming in from the upper right on YouTube.
Yep.
Well, that's again, they have control over that. They have control over what
Yeah.
they're suggesting. And
Hmm.
76% of those recommendations nationwide that they were making were coming from liberal news sources. Well,
Hmm.
Google would say, well, that's how many liberal news sources there are. No, that's not true. We actually counted them.
Hmm.
38% of the news sources are liberal, not 76%. And that's going to registered voters. That's what they were sending out to registered voters. Do you know what percentage of those up next suggestions from YouTube, what percentage are come from liberal news sources or liberal sources and that are going to our children? It's much higher than 76%. It's
Yeah.
96%.
Wow.
So in other words, they are working very hard to indoctrinate our kids. And again, the system we have set up is the only one in the world that is collecting the data to preserve what it is they are sending to people. So this is where that
Yeah.
ephemeral word comes into
Right.
play, because 2018 there was a leak of emails from Google to the Wall Street Journal, and in the email conversation, Googlers were discussing how can we use ephemeral experiences to change people's views about Trump's travel ban. Now, they actually use that term.
Mm-hmm.
Ephemeral experiences are these brief experiences that all of us have every day. Well, let's say Google search results or search suggestions that are being flashed at you, news feeds. It's all temporary. It's all customized just for you. It's personalized. It affects you. You click on something, it
Mm-hmm.
disappears, it's gone forever, and there's no record of it. That's why they're using ephemeral experiences to
Wow.
manipulate. And that's what we study in our experiments. We study the power that ephemeral experiences have to impact, well, everything: votes, beliefs, attitudes. And again, the numbers are just extraordinary.
I mean, this is terrifying. I mean, everybody's using these devices, using
Right.
these search engines, whatever it might be. So no one's going to escape this at this point. You said something earlier that change is coming, and you talked about timing, sometime next year. So, how close? I could see that the change may be coming after the election, and they say, well, we missed it. Like, is this possible to get this done before the election? Because this is terrifying.
Oh, yes, we are actually making progress right now as we speak. Because what we've been doing over the years is, uh, and was, by the way, in response to a conversation that I had with a state attorney general. He's the one who got me started on this back in 2015. What we've been doing over the years is recruiting registered voters. Sometimes they're around the country, sometimes they're in swing states, and equipping their computers with special software, which allows us, with their permission, of course, to look over their shoulders at the content they're seeing that's election related, and then we take a snapshot of it, we upload it, so we're getting, that kind of information. We're preserving ephemeral content from the computers of
Mm-hmm.
thousands of people. We now have in this group more than 8,300 registered voters, real people, in all 50 U.S. states. And by the end of this year, we'll probably have at least 5 times that many, or even 10 times that
Yeah.
many. And because we're trying to hit certain minimums in each state so that we can, expose what's going on in a meaningful way. But we're collecting millions of these ephemeral experiences. In the last few months, we have preserved and analyzed more than 10 million of these ephemeral experiences, normally lost forever. So to answer your question, we're very close now to being able to expose what's going on, what these companies are
Mm-hmm.
showing to real people and to kids. We've also recruited
Mm.
now more than 1,800 children and teens with their parents' permission, and we're starting to look at the content that these companies are sending to kids. So, it's going to be very soon. Within a few months, we're going to start releasing our findings probably every single day. We're going to have a public dashboard, if you want a glimpse of what it's going to look like, it's at americasdigitalshield.com,
Mm.
americasdigitalshield.com, and people and authorities too are going to be able to go to dashboards and actually see the bias that we're measuring, not just on Google, but Bing, Yahoo, Facebook,
Mm-hmm.
YouTube, Instagram, and we're now building the capability to monitor TikTok. So we are what doing what needs to be done. You have to
Yeah.
set up monitoring systems. They have to be permanent because the temptation by these companies have to manipulate people is so strong
Yeah.
that the only way to counter them, it's not going to be with laws and regulations, by the way, because they move too slowly. Tech moves very fast. It's going to be with monitoring systems, because monitoring systems are tech, and we've been building those systems since 2016. Our systems are getting bigger and bigger and more sophisticated, and our team of field agents around the country is growing every single day. And it's really this year, it's within a few months, we're going to be in a position to expose the manipulations of these companies on a daily basis. Now,
Yeah.
the idea here is not to catch them, it's to stop them.
Yeah.
And in 2020, we were so concerned about the bias we saw in the presidential election that we sent information to Senator Cruz's office. And as a result, 2 days after the election, November 5th, 2020, 3 U.S. senators sent a very, very threatening letter to the CEO of Google, 2 pages summarizing Epstein's results, saying, how do you account for this?
Mm-hmm.
Did that have an impact? You bet. Immediately, Google shut off all of its manipulations in the Georgia Senate runoff elections. How do we know that? Because we had more than 1,000 field agents in Georgia. We saw them shut it off. No one got go vote reminders in Georgia from that point on,
Hmm.
and the bias in Google search results went to zero, which we had never ever seen
Wow.
before.
Did they
That's the
keep it off?
power. That's right. No, did
Yeah.
they keep it off? No, but they kept it off
Yeah.
up until election day, so they really did stay out of those two Georgia races. The point is, the
Yeah.
power of sunlight
Mm.
cannot be, overestimated. 100 years ago, one of our Supreme Court justices said, "Sunlight is the best disinfectant."
That's right.
And he said, "In street lamps," this was 1913. He said, "In street lamps are the best policemen." And that's what we're building. That has to exist. It's not optional. If we want to have a free and fair election, if we want to have a democracy that's
Yeah.
meaningful, we have to have in place permanent monitoring systems that run 24 hours a day, year round, that keep an eye on these companies. Again, not to catch them, although here and there I'm sure we will catch them because we already have, but to stop them.
Expose what
They
they're doing. Yeah.
expose it, and therefore, most cases, they're not going to take a chance. They
Yeah.
are, if we are monitoring and analyzing and releasing our findings 24 hours a day, they'd be insane to take a chance because they will go to jail. They
Yeah.
will face enormous fines. They are breaking the law.
Well, this is really encouraging, the work that you're doing. But what could the average everyday citizen do? Is there something we could do now? You talked a lot about surveillance and things like that. Is there something we can do to slow this down while you're monitoring them?
Yes, there's two websites I'll give out. One is mygoogleresearch.com.
Mm-hmm.
Mygoogleresearch.com. That's a place where, first of all, there are links to uh, all of the research we're doing and a lot of the articles that have been written about this work, and a lot of my TV appearances. On Tucker Carlson, who's become a friend over the years, and
Yeah.
Mark Levin, and all those kinds of shows. Joe Rogan. Uh, there's also the links where people can donate to support this work because
Yeah.
we're a nonprofit organization, uh, and some people donate $10, some people donate $1, but we've had people who've donated through that website
Wow.
$300,000. And what we're doing is very expensive, unfortunately, because we have a staff of 50 people doing the recruiting, the training, the vetting of all these field agents we have around the country. We have to protect their identities, just like the Nielsen Company has to protect the identities of the Nielsen families, which give us, the television ratings. We protect our field agents as well.
Mm-hmm.
So mygoogleresearch.com, that's one place to go. But another place to go is myprivacytips.com, because that way you can begin to learn how to protect your own privacy and the privacy of your family members. That essay of mine at myprivacytips.com begins, "I have not received a targeted ad on my phone or computer since 2014." So,
It's
if
amazing.
you learn, if you learn a little bit about the surveillance that's ongoing, you can also learn ways to avoid the surveillance, which I've done very, very successfully. Can be done, and everyone around me, everyone in my family, all my staff, they all take these extra steps to protect their privacy. So you want to try to help us, on a large scale level, a global level. You want to, if you have any connections to major funding, please let us know, because again, what we're doing is expensive, and this year, the first year, the startup costs are very, very high because we have to get that full panel of field agents in place.
Mm-hmm.
But after that, the costs will come way down, and we know how to make this system self-sustaining and permanent. So my GoogleResearch.com, my PrivacyTips.com, those are the main places to go. Or if you want a glimpse of what one of these online dashboards is going to look like, where we are revealing the bias, the manipulations, the indoctrination that we find on a daily basis, go to americasdigitalshield.com, and you'll get a glimpse of what it is we're building.
Well, Dr. Epstein, this has been very encouraging, we can't get there fast enough. So I really hope the listeners will go out and support the work that you're doing, and then also, get those tips so that we could minimize our digital footprint out there for these big tech companies. But again, thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you, Jerry, for giving me a chance to talk to people about this. It's extremely important. Frankly, I don't think there's anything more important right now than this issue, because, again, if we don't get this under control, we are handing over our democracy, we're handing over the minds of our children, our very impressionable children, to the tech lords. Yeah. And they know they have this power, and they exercise this power. And, if we do nothing, we've literally handed everything over to them.
All right, well, that's our show for today. Thank you so much for tuning in and supporting conservative media. Don't ever forget that by working together and staying diligent, we conservatives can bring our country back to true greatness. Until next week, let's all keep praying that God will continue to bless America.
First Right, a new kind of news summary without the liberal slant. Every morning, in your inbox, always free. Subscribe by texting First Right to 30161. That's First Right, all caps, one word, to 30161.